Life on a yacht is a dream for many, but anyone who has actually lived on the water can tell you that buying a boat doesn't always live up to expectations. Still, few stories match the intensity and tragic ending of this one. The story of Karen Barnes and Larry Ford can be seen in different ways, either as a real-life psychological thriller that ended in fire and death, or as a cautionary tale about how not to choose a partner for life aboard a boat. On August 13, 2012, around 3 o'clock in the morning, a dispatcher for the St. Mary's, Georgia Emergency Services answered a call. However, all she could make out were unclear noises, faint sounds, cries, and moans. Then the line went silent. The dispatcher quickly traced the origin of the call and discovered it had come from the dock. The St. Mary's River, stretching 200 kilometers, is a slow-moving waterway winding through forests and swampland. Located in the southeastern part of the state, the river forms a natural border between Georgia and Florida. The town of St. Mary's itself is known for its southern charm and laid-back, vacation-like atmosphere. It's a small but picturesque town that attracts fishing enthusiasts. But that night, someone at the dock was in urgent need of help. Police headed toward the marina. From a distance, they could already see flames shooting into the sky above the river. A luxurious yacht was engulfed in fire. However, firefighters who had arrived before the police couldn't even get close due to the intense heat radiating from the vessel. The temperature ranged from 1,000 to 1,500 degrees. The heat could be felt even from the shore. It was impossible to approach without risking serious injury. All they could do was wait and let the fire burn itself out, which meant that if someone was indeed on board, survival would have been impossible. Some might assume that since the yacht was surrounded by water, the fire would be quickly extinguished. But in reality, if the blaze was fueled by flammable liquids like gasoline, oil, or grease, water is useless and can even make things worse. Water can spread the burning liquid, creating an even more intense fire. Not knowing how the fire had started, the firefighters had no choice but to let it burn. However, the police couldn't just sit back and wait. They requested information about the vessel. It was called Premium Time, an 11-meter live-aboard trawler. Although trawlers were traditionally known as motor yachts used for fishing, today many are used as floating homes, offering comfortable living spaces and even various amenities. The police contacted Great Harbor, the company that built the trawler, to find out who owned it. Because just like cars, every yacht has a unique identification number assigned to its owner. It turned out that Premium Time was registered to 55-year-old Karen Barnes. Officers tried to contact Karen, hoping she wasn't on the burning yacht. She didn't answer, but people who knew Karen informed the police that her friend Larry Ford's boat was usually docked near her trawler. The officers went to check Larry's boat, knocking and calling out for both him and Karen, but there was no response. They understood this wasn't a good sign, but they continued to hope that Karen and Larry had left together and were safe somewhere. It wasn't until 6:20 a.m. that the fire finally allowed firefighters to get close to the yacht. They cut the anchor and towed it to shore. The blaze wasn't fully extinguished until 12:15 that afternoon. By then, almost nothing was left of the trawler, just charred remains. And yet, officers managed to recover a bullet, 2 shell casings, and several fragments of a handgun, and something they had feared: fragments of human bones. DNA analysis later confirmed that Karen Barnes and her friend Larry Ford had both died on the boat. But investigators still didn't know what had happened. Was it a tragic accident? Or had someone murdered Karen and Larry? Or perhaps one of them, possibly Larry, had killed the other and then taken their own life. Officers couldn't be sure, especially since the gun might have belonged to one of them and could have discharged due to the extreme heat. Since the boat belonged to Karen, police quickly set out to learn as much as they could about her life. Not long ago, Karen had begun to truly enjoy the beauty of life on the river. She took pleasure in beach walks, swimming, collecting seashells, and kayaking. Her trawler had previously been docked at Jekyll Island, where she met and befriended Larry Ford, a true boatman through and through, who worked as a mechanic in southern Georgia, repairing boats and installing marine equipment. Karen and Larry arrived in St. Mary's together, but not because they were a couple. Larry simply couldn't say no when Karen needed help and support. He was concerned about her, especially because of her ongoing divorce. 5 months before the fire in April 2012, Karen had filed for divorce from 67-year-old David Trauger. David and Karen met in 2009. Karen was working as an event coordinator at a restaurant in Georgia, while David owned an insurance company in Pennsylvania and was quite a wealthy man. At the time he met Karen, David was in the process of divorcing his first wife, with whom he had spent 22 years. Charming and intelligent, David quickly won Karen over. He was courteous, generous, and promised her a wonderful, carefree life aboard his luxurious yacht. David had purchased the premium time trawler in 2006 and had it upgraded, a project that ultimately cost him $558,000. The premium time was truly a luxury vessel, as David had poured nearly all his savings into it, planning to live on the boat during his retirement. After a long career in the insurance business, David dreamed of sunbathing and surfing in the Bahamas, and he dreamed of Karen sharing the second half of his life with him. For her part, Karen saw in David a chance at a new, beautiful future. She was drawn to his kindness, his adventurous spirit, and the appeal of life on the water. David and Karen got married just 3 months after meeting and set sail to the Bahamas on the yacht. The couple was surrounded by friends who were just as passionate about yachts as they were. But interestingly, their friends had very different views of David and Karen's relationship. Most acquaintances described David as not a particularly pleasant person. His mood often changed, he was jealous, and he drank too much. There were rumors that he mistreated Karen, something that wouldn't have surprised anyone, as he had reportedly been cruel to his ex-wife and past girlfriends. Karen, on the other hand, was energetic, sociable, and easily made friends. But she also liked to flirt a little, and her jealous husband didn't like that at all. In fact, during one jealous outburst, he once threw his wedding ring into the water. On the other hand, David's best friend, Neil Ingram, believed that Karen was only after David's money and that David needed to keep an eye on her because she flirted too much with other men. However, there were also rumors that Neil spoke so poorly of Karen because she had rejected his advances. Overall, this period in the couple's life was filled with more gossip than facts. But one thing was clear: the direction their relationship was heading wasn't a good one. The days once filled with romance quickly turned into something far more frightening. The couple began arguing more and more frequently. Karen didn't drink alcohol, but that didn't stop David. And when he drank, he became a completely different person. Soon, Karen saw how drastically her once gallant and charming husband changed under the influence of alcohol. One day, she was video chatting with friends from her hometown via Skype. David was at a bar drinking. He returned to the boat while Karen was still talking and demanded that she end the conversation. She told him to go to bed because he was drunk and tried to continue chatting with her friends. Moments later, David appeared behind her. He wrapped something around her neck and began to strangle her. Her friends watched in horror, fearing for her life but unable to help. Meanwhile, David twisted her arm so violently that he broke it. Karen screamed, and her cries were heard by neighbors on other boats who rushed to help. They managed to subdue the raging man. After the incident, Karen left her husband and moved to Georgia. But this story wouldn't exist if it had ended there. By April 2011, David had convinced Karen to come back to him. She agreed but set several conditions. In particular, David began attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Additionally, Karen didn't want her husband to associate with his friend, Neil. So the couple set off on the yacht to Jekyll Island. It seemed the changes helped and their marriage improved. About a year later, in March 2012, David transferred all the yacht's ownership documents to Karen, a decision he would later regret. Surprisingly, in the same month, after what appeared to be a wonderful time spent together in Hawaii, they filed for divorce. If you're wondering what exactly is going on, you're not alone. The thing is, when David and Karen got married, David still owed his first wife $235,000 from their divorce settlement. David was afraid that his ex-wife might try to claim that money by placing a lien on his assets. And one of those assets was the yacht, into which David had poured over $500,000. According to David's lawyer, the couple's divorce was a poorly disguised scheme to put premium time out of reach of the ex-wife. Now, legally, the boat belonged to Karen, not David, and it couldn't be sold to pay off the money owed to the ex-wife. As David explained to his lawyer, the plan was to start the divorce process. Then Karen would eventually transfer the boat back to David, and they would live happily ever after. At least that's what David thought. He even told his lawyer that the brilliant plan was actually Karen's idea. However, how simple and clever the plan really was, David only found out several months later. In early June, David went to Pennsylvania for work, leaving Karen on premium time. On June 22nd, the man boarded his yacht in a wonderful mood, carrying wine and flowers, only to find new locks on the doors. When he tried to figure out what was going on, a police officer arrived and informed him that he was no longer allowed to stay on the yacht. Its legal owner, Karen Barnes, considered his presence unwanted. The officer handed him the keys to a storage locker where all of his belongings had been moved. Security camera footage captured David shouting in shock and fury, "What have I gotten myself into? What am I going to do now?" The officer asked him a few questions, and with each answer, David grew angrier. The officer asked, "Do you still live in Florida?" David replied, "No, that's the whole point. The yacht is my home. Florida is just a mailing address. I don't have a house, I don't have money, no savings. Everything's tied up in this yacht she took right from under my nose." David admitted he hadn't expected this at all and now had nowhere to live. The yacht was perhaps the most important thing left in his life. According to witnesses, that day changed everything. David rushed to his lawyer and tried to annul the divorce, arguing that until that day he and Karen had continued living as husband and wife. However, the lawyer was not optimistic about his chances because David's argument essentially admitted to a fraudulent scheme. Karen, of course, would deny any involvement, which would make her position much stronger in court. The judge was scheduled to hear the annulment case on August 14th, the day after the yacht was found on fire. Meanwhile, Karen also turned to a lawyer. She filed a police report claiming that David was stalking and threatening her, and when he found out she had changed the locks, he tried to break into the boat through a window. Additionally, she complained that David was not paying her alimony. She was so afraid of him that she had to hide. Together with her new friend Larry Ford, she fled to St. Mary's, about 80 kilometers south of Jekyll Island. 71-year-old Larry Ford turned out to be not only a skilled mechanic, but also a true gentleman, deciding he had to protect Karen. He bought 2 guns, one for himself and one for her. Although Larry didn't really need to hide, as David was not chasing him. There was no evidence that Larry and Karen became a couple. Everyone who knew them believed that Larry sincerely wanted to help a woman in trouble. One friend even asked Larry why he didn't just stop getting involved in this family mess. Larry replied, "I'm afraid it's too late for that. I have to help her." Moreover, Karen lacked experience handling such a large yacht. Neither Karen nor Larry told anyone where their boats were now docked, and for a while everything went well. But one day, while shopping at a grocery store, Karen spotted David. He was staring straight at her. Terrified, she abandoned her shopping cart and rushed toward the exit. David followed her. She only managed to lose him once she reached the police station, where she explained the situation and filed a complaint against her ex-husband. She was preparing a restraining order to keep him away. However, to serve this order, David first had to be located. The police didn't know where he was staying. As it later became known, after finding Karen, David didn't leave. He stayed in motels and eventually rented an apartment. David rekindled his friendship with his friend Neil, the same Neil who believed Karen was just after money. David called Neil a week before the fire and told him that Karen had stolen his yacht. Essentially, he told him the same story he had told his lawyer. Neil said that David's proposal to transfer the yacht to Karen and then get a divorce was seen by Karen as an unexpected financial windfall. David was hurt, upset, and angry, and he wanted to take revenge on Karen for what she had done. And then a week later, Karen was dead. Meanwhile, while the police were uncovering all these facts about Karen's life, a man named Ken Fickett, the owner of the company that built the trawlers, contacted law enforcement. He was convinced that the yacht could not have caught fire by accident and was eager to share this information with the police. He explained that his company had built the premium time specifically for David, and they had done everything possible to protect the yacht from accidental fires. It was made from fiberglass, a fire-resistant material. Yachts never use propane because it is very dangerous. Most importantly, the yacht was equipped with a fire suppression system that automatically activates in case of intense heat or smoke to stop a fire in the engine room before it spreads. In other words, Ken believed it was very unlikely that the fire on the premium time was accidental. Even if something caused the fire, the yacht could not have burned down completely. The only way this could happen was if someone had doused critical parts of the yacht with accelerants. Due to police reports of harassment faced by Karen Barnes and the nature of the couple's relationship, David became the first and only suspect. The police informed the public that he was suspected of murder, armed, and extremely dangerous. Officers wanted to arrest him before anyone else got hurt. They were notified that a car matching the description of the suspect's vehicle was spotted in a parking lot. It indeed turned out to be his car. The officers rushed to search the wooded area near the parking lot. Behind the parking lot, they noticed a path where they found a blood-stained holster, but the weapon was missing. Nearby on the ground were several bloody dollar bills and a wallet containing identification belonging to David Trauger. It was clear that he had been there. The police combed through the forest, searching all night and resuming again at daybreak. Since the man's photo was shown in the media, the police started receiving calls from concerned citizens. One caller reported seeing David near the apartment building where he lived. The investigators, who had been searching for the suspect in the woods all this time, rushed to their vehicles. When they arrived, other officers had already cordoned off the building. Suddenly, David appeared at the door. He looked like a man who had made up his mind about what to do. The man pulled out a gun, aimed it at the police officers, and fired. That was enough for the officers to open fire in response. David was hit by a barrage of bullets. One struck his leg, another his wrist, and one more his chest. The man was handcuffed while lying on the ground, either dead or dying. He died there. While going through David's papers in his car, investigators found a number of his letters and documents. Among them was a letter expressing his wishes regarding his burial, paperwork for purchasing a small boat, and a farewell note. "She lied to me up until the moment I returned to the dock," he wrote in the note, referring to the day he returned to Georgia from Pennsylvania. "Now everyone will know what a fool I was, deceived by her. She can boast about how in just 2 years she got a yacht worth $500,000. David was losing control over his greatest joy and pride, the yacht premium time, as well as over his wife. At that point, he probably began planning how to end her life and then his own. Resentment and anger so clouded his vision that David was hardly able to think rationally. As evidence of his irrationality, his lawyer pointed out that he committed the murders before, not after, the court hearing to annul his divorce. The lawyer did not expect what happened, but admitted that, in retrospect, David had few friends and family. She suggested that David imagined Karen and Larry sleeping together on his yacht and went mad. How far can a person be pushed before they lose the will to live? The next day, the police found the small boat that David had recently purchased. It was painted black and had cinder blocks and gasoline cans on board. Of course, David was no longer around to explain, but the investigators still tried to piece together the puzzle to understand how events unfolded that night 3 days earlier. Detectives believe that David, dressed in black, launched his small black boat into the water and placed the cinder blocks to weigh it down so it wouldn't rock on the water, because that would have drawn attention to it. The fact is, David had purchased a flat-bottom boat designed for navigating marshy areas or shallow waters. When moving, water splashes against the bottom of such a boat, creating a sloshing sound. The cinder blocks added weight, making the boat's movements much quieter. Thanks to this trick, David silently approached the premium time. The doors were locked, but he still managed to get inside. When he entered, Karen and Larry likely woke up. The police believe that David immediately aimed his weapon at them and fired, but did not kill them. They think so because Karen managed to reach a phone and call 911. After listening to the recording, the police were able to make out several words and sounds. David was apparently dousing the yacht with gasoline or something similar, while Larry was suffering terrible pain and torment. Some of his words are discernible. He shouted, "You bastard!" and "Why?" At the end of the recording, a deep voice said, "How did you get in here?" Those were most likely Karen Barnes's last words. The call to emergency services was Karen's last hope for rescue, but help didn't arrive in time. Larry and Karen died a painful death. It's worth noting that not everyone believes Karen deceived her husband and stole his yacht, or that this was her idea. After all, this story was only heard from David after his wife changed the locks. Despite the events confirming her client's severe mental instability, David's lawyer believes Karen did steal his boat. The lawyer argues that he was just an elderly, wealthy man who was tricked. If Karen had simply divorced him in the usual way and told him she was leaving because he was a mean old man, she would never have gotten the yacht. David adored the premium time and tied all his retirement plans to that boat. However, even if that were true and Karen took advantage of the opportunity to claim the yacht, it didn't bring her happiness. She feared her husband, understood the danger she faced, and took many steps to protect herself. She contacted the police, friends, and even learned how to use a firearm, but it wasn't enough. Perhaps what happened could have been prevented if David had been arrested for stalking. The most innocent victim in this whole story is Larry Ford. Not much is known about him, but no one ever said a bad word about him. He was a lover of a free, relaxed lifestyle with a keen sense of humor. He had golden hands and could fix anything on any boat, often doing work for other boaters. Larry was a good man who wanted to help his friend. Unfortunately, he was unlucky to get in the way of a vengeful ex-husband.